It seems like Jason Whitlock goes out of his way to undermine the accomplishments of Deion Sanders. The Colorado Buffaloes have started off 4-1, and Jason Whitlock has still changed the narrative on what Stephen A. Smith said he could potentially be a Coach of the Year candidate. But before we get off into today's podcast, tell a friend to tell a friend. Man, Jason Whitlock is still trying to undermine the accomplishments of Deion Sanders. Well, we all know Jason Whitlock is a heavy critic of Deion Sanders. For some reason, it goes back as far as last year that he was really letting Deion Sanders have it. The Colorado Buffaloes started off a hot season last year when Deion Sanders took over the Colorado coaching job. They started off the season 3-0. And, Deion Sanders, his brash ways and, his primetime effect had, the sports world captivated. He had the rappers, the entrepreneurs, all the sports athletes wanting to get a glimpse of what Colorado was going to do. We seen how, the field was packed at Folsom Field, rappers in the locker room, entrepreneurs on the sideline, big time celebrities. And Jason Whitlock has been a heavy critic of Deion Sanders. I mean, he has been going on a record saying that Deion Sanders is running a clown show. Deion Sanders is, taking away from the kids, teaching these kids to go out and be rappers and, thugs and things like that. And that was all false. That's a false narrative that Jason Whitlock has created about Deion Sanders, questioning his Christian beliefs. And we know, Jason Whitlock has fell short of, his glory and all the failures that Jason Whitlock has been through in his life. It's all over the internet. We know what Jason Whitlock, has done. We don't have to advertise it. But Jason Whitlock still goes on record anytime that he can to bash Deion Sanders. Now, what happened was Stephen A. Smith on First Take yesterday, he just basically said after, Colorado had beat UCF was, 4-0 going on to the season. They was 4-0, and Colorado went down to the bounce house and beat a gamed UCF team on the road. They didn't just beat them, they beat the brakes off of them. And Jason Whitlock, has some things to say because Stephen A. Smith said, if Deion Sanders in Colorado keeps winning, he can be potentially a Coach of the Year candidate. He never went on record to say that he was Coach of the Year. And Jason Whitlock, changed the narrative. And, he has some things to say toward, Stephen A. Smith. And then at the same time, taking a shot at Deion Sanders. Now, Colorado is off to a hot start this year. They're 4-1. The first game of the season against North Dakota State, they won 31-26. And then that following week, they went into Nebraska and got beat 28-10. Then they followed that up with a in-state rival game against Colorado State. They won 28-9. And then they went back at home against Baylor and got a great overtime win, 38-31. Shedeur Sanders, last play of the game, threw a Hail Mary pass, and LaJohntay Wester came down with it, sent that game into overtime. And we saw what Travis Hunter did when Baylor was trying to score. Travis Hunter made the game-saving tackle, forced the fumble, and the game was over. And then they went down to the bounce house this past Saturday and beat a UCF team 48-21, which was a well-balanced game for the Colorado Buffaloes. They showed, grit in all facets of the game. Defensively, they came out strong. They stopped the run. Offense, they moved the ball. They got off to a shaky start because Shedeur threw the interception, but they settled down and they got into the groove. Special teams, Mata kicking, field goals. That field goal at the end of the half was huge, and they just kept the momentum going. So they off to a hot start, 4-1. So Stephen A. Smith goes on First Take, and he says basically, because Paul Feinbaum, he's a highly critic of Deion Sanders. He hates Deion Sanders. But at the same time, last week, Deion Sanders, after the game, he humbled Paul Feinbaum. You know what I'm saying? He came to his senses and said he was wrong about this Colorado team because, Deion Sanders already took a shot at him, and because Paul Feinbaum said that, Colorado is irrelevant, and Deion Sanders said, if we're irrelevant, why are you still talking about us? He said, a fan only blows when you're hot. So let's take a listen to what Deion Sanders said on First Take, followed up what Jason Whitlock had to say. And Deion Sanders just said, Stephen A. Smith basically just said, if they keep winning, he could be a potential Coach of the Year candidate. So let's take a listen to what Stephen A. Smith said on the First Take, followed up by how Jason Whitlock responded. Let's take a listen.
Primetime Deion Sanders is making the case to be Coach of the Year. I don't think anybody's noticed this or not. But when you consider what was projected, how they are, they were projected to finish 11th? People were wondering whether or not they were going to win 3 or 4 games. They 4-1. They're 4-1 right now.
That's Stephen A. campaigning for Deion for Coach of the Year. They beat Colorado State. They beat North Dakota State. They beat overvalued UCF team. And who else am I missing someone? Have they played 4 games or 5?
Yeah, and they lost to Nebraska, and they beat Baylor.
Lost to Nebraska. Beat Baylor. There it is. Beat Baylor. So I want to give you Coach of the Year. I want to give you some other Coach of the Year candidates. Frank Zignetti. Indiana is 5-0 for the first time since 1967. People want to talk about bad football programs. Indiana, and I know they had the Bill Mallory era, but Colorado's got far more history on the football field than Indiana. Kellen DeBoer at Alabama. They're 4-0, and yes, it's Alabama, but holy cow, since 2022, DeBoer is 7-0 over Dan Lanning, Lincoln Riley, Steve Sarkisian, Kirby Smart.
And we're talking about Alabama.
How about TJ Moseman, Barry Odom at UNLV? 4-0. Eyeing the first consecutive winning season since 83-84. Manny Diaz at Duke. He's 5-0. Duke, 5-0. And then I can't even pronounce BYU's head coach's name, Kalani. I can't pronounce Sataki. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Korean Kosel. That's why you're here. BYU, 5-0. They beat SMU, Kansas State. Deion sucks up all the oxygen out of the room. You can't even discuss other people because everything's Deion. Deion is actually who people think Caitlin Clark is. That, Caitlin Clark gets too much hype. No, Caitlin Clark gets too much hype. You can't focus on all these other people. It's actually Deion Sanders who is Caitlin Clark. But your thoughts on Deion as Coach of the Year?
Now, you heard what Jason Whitlock had to say. All Stephen A. Smith said was if he continues to win, he could potentially be a candidate for Coach of the Year. He never said that he was the Coach of the Year. And what Jason Whitlock, anytime Jason Whitlock can take a dig at Deion Sanders, he going to do it. He's just going to open fire, rapid fire. Jason Whitlock creates his own narratives. You see what he did? He changed the whole narrative from what Stephen A. Smith said to fit his own agenda and just to undermine the things that Deion Sanders is doing. Now it's going to be another situation where Deion got to humble him just same way he humbled Paul Feinbaum. So, Deion Sanders just got to continue to keep doing what he's doing. Like I said, I've been on record. You can go back and look at the catalog and the videos I produced about Colorado before the start of the season when they did that overhaul with people jumping in the portal, people signing to Colorado, and the new 5 offensive linemen, the coaching staff that they brought in. What you see what Livingston's doing on the defensive side of the ball. You see what Pat Shermer's doing on the offensive side of the ball with Shedeur Sanders. And you see what Warren Sapp is doing with the defensive line. And you see what Phil Ledhol's doing with the offensive line. Yes, Shedeur Sanders is still getting hit, but he's not being sacked as much. He's still taking hits, but, they putting it all together. They finally found a run game against UCF. Now, if they can put that together continuously, they'll make a run at it. And what Jason Whitlock said, he will not give Deion Sanders no credit at all. I just think when I went on record and said, I think they're going to win 8 to 9 games, and it's still reachable. 4 more games, get them in a bowl. Travis, Hunter got his sights on the Heisman. And also, Deion Sanders, they got their sight on the bowl game. But Jason Whitlock would not give him credit for anything. And if that happens, like Stephen A. Smith said, he can potentially be a Coach of the Year candidate. So you guys let me know what y'all think down in the comment section on how Jason Whitlock responded to Stephen A. Smith. And that's going to wrap up another episode of the Simply Ball Dropping Podcast. I'm your host and the man behind the mic, K-Sap. We're going to catch you on the next one. Deuces.
Thanks for listening to the Simply Ball Dropping Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share on all major platforms.
That's all, folks.